still got some more adrenaline left in me, so I can keep going. I'm not feeling the greatest, but you know what? This is an important day. Amen? Not only just to be here in church to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, but I feel like God has put something on my heart this morning to share, and it's not like I haven't shared something like this before, but when something's important, it's important, right? And I want to begin a new series this morning and talk about revolution. I wonder what you think of when you hear or see the word revolution. Does anybody want to shout out? What do you think of? French Revolution? Okay. Anyone else? Conflict? Yeah. Sorry? War? Yeah. Nobody thinks of the Beatles song? We're gonna revolution. Yeah, that's a good song. Okay, or the American Revolution, right? That's another one, yeah. Okay, well, revolution has happened many times in history, right? But what is it? It is referring to a movement or the actions of those in that movement in order to overthrow a government, in order to overthrow the status quo, to bring about a new status quo, a new reality. But why would people do this? Why would people want to try to overthrow their governments? Well, I think it's fair to say that we all have a sense of justice within us, right? We all have a conscience, is maybe another way to say it, that we know how things should be and we know how things shouldn't be. And when things aren't going the right way, something rises up within us. And so when we see too many injustices in the world or in our government or in our society, something within us rises up and we want to make change, right? And some people have, I guess, the courage to do something about it. Or another way to look at it is maybe they are so fed up, they have no other choice, right? And the couple historical examples that came to my mind were the American Revolution. The American colonies were tired of the injustices that the British monarchy were doing, imposing taxes on them and telling them what to do. Hey, you can't tell me don't tell me what to do, right? Well, they revolted against the British monarchy and started a war, and won that war, and they were able to overthrow the British rule over them. Now, not every revolution is successful like that. And I use the word success in the sense of they got what they wanted, right? I've talked about, and we talked about last year when we looked at the book of Revelation, that it's very important for us as Christians to know that within the historical context of the Gospels, you find the Jewish people being occupied and oppressed by the Roman Empire, right? Talked about that many times. But what that caused within the Jewish people was, hey, this isn't right. We should be able to live our own lives, have our own country. We don't want to be ruled over by these other people. Who likes being ruled over by anyone, right? Let alone foreigners, right? And so many times in the first and second centuries, the Jewish people revolted against the Roman Empire. And of course, probably the most famous one was the Roman-Jewish War that led in 70 AD to the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. The Romans won. You know, you can say that God was on their side, and God certainly was on the Jewish people's side in the Hanukkah Revolution. So they expected maybe this would happen again. Maybe God would help us and allow us to defeat our enemies. Wow, something happened in the first century that indicated that God was no longer on the side of violence. God was no longer on the side of that kind of revolution. God was trying to communicate to his people, and he still is trying to communicate to us today, that revolution is a normal and justified thing to do, and we have that burning within us sometimes, but it's how we do it that matters, right? So, the first century Jewish people tried to revolt or did revolt against the Romans, and it ended in the destruction of their capital city. And not less than 100 years later, they tried again. And this time they had a charismatic military leader, Bar Kokhba. And one of the leading rabbis of the day said, "This is the Messiah." And how did it end? With the Romans defeating them again. That's the second great Jewish revolt, if you were interested in looking that up. So these are just a few examples of times when people tried to revolt against their government, revolt against the way things were, and tried to bring change. And that sense of wanting to see change hasn't left us, right? We still have it among us in many different forms, many different ways. But today, especially if you're on Twitter, and who here is on Twitter? Anybody on Twitter? Yeah, a little bit? And who here has been hearing about the possibility of Elon Musk buying Twitter and all that? I don't know about you, but that is an interesting way to shake things up, to say the least. But people today are looking for social justice. Have you heard that term before? There are injustices happening today, right? Especially among minority groups or two minority groups. For example, police officers seem to be shooting people of color for racial reasons. Not every time, but it seems to be happening, especially in the United States. And so there are a lot of people who say, look, racism still exists. In fact, if we look deep enough, it's there on an institutional level, systemic racism, they would call it. And so we need to revolt against the system and against those who are in power so that we can make a change for the better. And so it is necessary in those circumstances to revolt against the system. And we saw this manifested a couple years ago. You know, it was such a strange year. 2020 was a strange year, right? Pandemic and then a whole bunch of riots and protests, or protests and then riots. And surely some people were peacefully protesting. Not going to deny that. Lots of people were out there protesting peacefully for the purpose of wanting to see change. But then, you know, sadly, there were a few, and this sort of ruined it in a sense. The few people out there who were protesting suddenly became violent and destructive. And violence just seems to be the easy way out, doesn't it? Like, it seems to be the way that we humans just default. We default to violence. Not getting your way, violence. You want something, violence, right? Like, it just seems like that is, if we don't like to think outside the box, we just think, well, let me try to get my way, and I'm going to force my way. But what does violence get us, right? What has violence always gotten us? Death and destruction. Nothing good, right? And again, like talking about the American Revolution, even when it works, right? They used violence to fight against the British monarchy, and it worked. They got their own country. The United States was born. But, you know, even though I think the United States is the freest country that the world has ever seen, the U.S. government has become the most tyrannical government, maybe not that the world has ever seen, but certainly more tyrannical than the British monarchy that they were revolting against. Yeah, the country was founded on violence, and so it has continued to be based upon violence, despite all the good that we could point to. So what do? Do we revolt or not revolt? To be or not to be, to revolt or not to revolt? Should we do something about our situation? Do you think we should? Right? Like, do you think we should do something when we see injustice in the world? Do you think we should do something about it? Lots of people think so. And I think having that sense of justice or that desire for justice and wanting to revolt in the name of justice is a good thing. I found this in Psalm 106. The psalmist said, "How blessed are those who maintain justice, those who practice righteousness at all times." Right? Actually, in fact, out of all the people that you could point to, I think church people, Jesus' people, should be the ones who are most desirous of justice. Right? We want to positively change the world, right? That's one of our goals, is to positively change the world. And in fact, in Judaism, they have an expression called tikkun olam. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. but it basically means to fix the world. And that sums up what we want to do and what we want to be about. We want to fix this world, right? Our world is broken, it is fallen, and it's our job to be the tools or the instruments that God uses to fix the world. I think that's a wonderful way to think of ourselves and to look at part of our mission as Christians is to be the tools and instruments that God uses to fix the world, right? He could just snap his fingers and fix the world, but he wants freedom of the will to be a real thing, and so he uses people and he wants us to choose to fix the world in his name. So I do believe that we should be a part of a Jesus revolution, right? And that's what I'm naming today's message in this series. We should be a part of a Jesus revolution. Do you like what I did there? I didn't make it up. I stole that from somebody. But there is a way to have revolution and to do it the right way. And it is by reversing those letters and getting that word, love, out of it. So think about this. Okay, I want us to think about Jesus, our Lord, our risen Messiah, that he often confronted corruption among the leadership of his day. Do you think that sometimes politicians can be corrupt? Is that possible? While Jesus confronted the politicians and the religious leadership of his day, he confronted them and called them out on their corruption, right? And sometimes he did dramatic things in order to bring about change and to see positive change. Remember when he turned over the tables of the money changers? That was dramatic. He did that on purpose to really make a point, right? And think about the people who were oppressed, right? There were plenty of minorities and plenty of poor people that Jesus cared deeply for, and he wanted to see them be lifted out of their situation, to be freed from their oppression. And so Jesus wanted to bring about justice to the world and to his people. So of all the people in history, if there's somebody to admire when it comes to justice, it's Jesus, right? We should admire Jesus to be as someone who was wanting justice and seeking after justice. And in fact, I think Jesus wanted to, and in fact did, start a revolution. He started something to get justice in the end. But unlike all of the other revolutionaries, Jesus forbade. Is that the past tense of forbid? He forbade his followers to commit acts of violence. So even though it's our default, and even though it's the easier way, Jesus said, nope, not my followers. If you do use violence, you're not my followers, right? He said, all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. And in fact, what we should be doing and seeking after is to be at peace with one another. So that means violence is off the table. It's not an option for us. And if you advocate for or are supporting something that uses violence, you're going contrary to Jesus' way. You need to ask yourself, do I have more than one king in my life? Or do I have only one king, Jesus? Because I think we should have no king but Jesus, right? Well, I think that that's what we should be doing in this series, and in general in our lives. But in this sermon series, we're going to look at how Jesus' words, how his teachings and his actions can help us right now in our lives today to bring about the Jesus revolution, to bring about positive change, not through violence, but by bringing love into the world and by indeed subverting the norms of our day. So let's look at that. The teachings of Jesus often subverted cultural norms. He often would take what people expected and he turned it on its head so that people would have to rethink things and maybe look at things more deeply. He often would, again, take what people expected and bring them something different, bring them something better. And his end goal was to have people and a society who loved one another, who treated each other as equals, right? To remove that idea that we rule over one another, but instead we love one another and we partner together to worship our true King. And so part of how we can get to being a part of the Jesus revolution is identifying who our enemy is, right? There's a Rage Against the Machine song, know your enemy. Well, who is our enemy? Our enemy is not the Romans. Our enemy is not government officials. Our enemy is not even a human being. We are not fighting, Paul said, against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world. And we don't even have to get into the metaphysics of what that means. We just have to say that there's something deeper at play when people do evil. It's not just that person, there's something deeper. And that's the thing that is deeper is what our enemy is, not the person, right? When a Roman would abuse their power and hurt Jewish people, that individual Roman was just sort of acting out the spirit of the age, the spirit of the culture of the Roman Empire. And the same thing is true today. When people are abusing power and doing evil things, there's just sort of being a part. We don't want to remove individual responsibility. That's not my point. My point is to say is, let's not get fixated on the individual. Let's look at the greater force that is behind evil and try to fight against that. So we fight the forces that are behind the people who are doing evil. And how do we do that? Well, firstly, we love them. We love those individuals. Jesus said to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. What? We're supposed to love the people who are our enemies and persecute us? Yeah, because they are not actually our enemies, right? You know what I mean? He's saying there's something deeper there that is against us. And so let's love these people, and hopefully God will use that love, that expression of love that we're showing them to change them, right? To turn something inside of them towards him. That is the effect that loving your enemy can have. If you love your enemy or love those who persecute you, you might be able, or God might be able to turn something inside of them so that they can say, what am I doing? Right? They have that realization of, what am I doing? I'm hurting this person and they're loving me? I better rethink this thing. What's different about this person, right? That's the ideal. That would be great, right? That's our first choice. But let's say maybe the person is hard-hearted and loving them doesn't do anything, doesn't change them. What can we do? Well, do we go to plan B and we say, okay, in that situation, I already tried to love him, so now I'm going to punch him? Is that what we should do? No. We have to get creative at that point, right? Jesus was, and I know I've shared this before, but I felt like this was so important to look at this again as a sort of way of launching this series of saying, this is one example, and I'm going to show you so much more in the Gospels. But for this, I actually need 2 volunteers, either 2 guys or 2 girls, women, because I don't want a man to be hitting a woman. So, I don't mean literally, you're going to act it out. Oh, please, we'd have no volunteers. Joanne? Okay, Joanne and Sarah? Okay, thank you. Who wants to be the aggressor? Well, you're wearing red, so you're the Roman. Okay, so Joanne, yeah, that's fine right there. So Joanne, you're the, do you want to zoom out the camera just so people can see it? Or are they in the shot? Okay, there you go. Okay, that's good. Okay, so Joanne is the Roman, and Sarah is the Jewish peasant. You're poor. And obviously in that culture, the Roman had the, what's the term? Had the class, the higher class. What's that called? And you're the lower class, and you have the ability to do what you want, and you don't, right? So Jesus said, if somebody slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. So notice what Joanne did. Joanne had to slap Sarah on the right cheek. Where's your right cheek, Sarah? That one. Just making sure, making it obvious, right? Yeah. And so you couldn't, okay, I'm gonna explain this a little bit. In Roman culture, or in Jewish culture, ancient culture, I don't want to say what they actually did, but they used their left hand for unclean tasks. I'll just leave it at that. Do you get what I'm saying? They would do things with their left hand, and they wouldn't want to use their left hand for any other purpose during the day, I guess. And so in order for a Roman to slap the face of a Jewish peasant, to slap the right side of a Jewish peasant, they had to use their backhand, which is why Joanne did that, right? Are we catching this? And so Jesus says, if somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. And so what this is, you guys can sit down. I'll try to explain it. So what this would result in, however, is the person then having to give that person a regular slap. The backhand in that day, and even to this day, I guess, a backhanded slap is not necessarily meant to hurt the person or injure the person. It's supposed to insult the person, right? If you give somebody a backhanded slap, that phrase is actually even used in that way. A backhanded slap is sort of like an insult. But if you were to slap them normally or punch them, well, then that is saying, you're my equal, we're fighting, you know? But that Roman is not trying to say you're my equal. He was trying to say you're my slave. You're you do what I say, right? And so Walter Wenck, who is this great New Testament theologian, is saying that when Jesus said, and here's the full verse, he said, I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. The term that's translated here as resist is a mistranslation. We get it from the King James Version. This is the New King James Version. All of the other translations, or most of the other translations, translate it in a better way. And we need to understand what the word means. It does not mean resist in the sense of being passive and not doing anything. Jesus is saying, do not violently oppose an evil person. The word that's translated as resist means violently opposing. Every time it's used in the Bible elsewhere, it's talking about some kind of violent situation. So Jesus was here saying, don't use violence. But he also wasn't saying, don't do nothing. You know why we know he was saying don't do nothing? Because he's telling them to turn the other cheek to the aggressor. And what that would be doing is disabling them from being able to backhand that person, right? And instead, that person, the aggressor, would be left with the option to start a fight with that person or acknowledge that this person is not my lesser, that this person deserves some sort of respect. Let's see if I can recap this here, because I just want to make sure we get this. That Jesus was noting that the one who was aggressing was striking the right cheek, right? But if that Roman goes like this, it is meant to insult the person. And so Jesus was saying, hey, without lifting your own hands in violence, I can show you a way to show this person that you are not somebody who should be degraded that way. Simply turn your cheek and offer your left cheek to that person and see what they do. If they hit you again, well, then they're saying you're an equal. And if they stop and think what they're doing, well, maybe you've affected them. Maybe God can use something inside of them to change them, right? And so I think Jesus is advocating that we do oppose evil, just not violently. and we start being creative in how we do it. So get that, right? There's a difference between being opposition to somebody, being opposed to somebody in a creative, nonviolent way, as opposed to opposing somebody with violence and just adding more evil to the world. I think this is revolutionary. I think this is the Jesus revolution, that we begin to fight against the culture that's out there that seeks to try to bring more evil into this world, more violence into this world. We can bring change to this world, but not by adding more evil to the world, but by bringing love to this world. And when love itself, direct love, does not always work or doesn't have the effect we want, let's just get creative and think of new ways to bring God's truth into this world. So I say all this, and I ask the question as we close our service this morning, what does this have to do with Resurrection Sunday? Well, because Jesus believed in and was devoted to this nonviolent way of bringing about God to the world, God's love to the world, that he gave up his life. And just to show that he was right in his approach, God raised him from the dead, right? So now we too can be a part of this revolution. Paul, come on up. We're going to sing Stand in Your Love, and let's stand together. We want to stand in God's love. There's no reason to fear because Jesus has already shown us the better way. And yeah, sometimes it can be tough to oppose evil, and sometimes we really need to ask God to help us to be creative. But God will use us to be able to oppose them. So let's sing this together.